Well, good afternoon, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so very much for once again joining us this evening. I'm excited today that we are having this session once again. My name is Guguletu Xaba, your host of Amandla Mnoto Rural Chamber of Commerce and Industry, as well as Operation Buyelekhaya. I've been rushing coming from Eswatini, and I land myself in the Johannesburg that does not have electricity, some parts of it, of course. And that is where I am, sadly. I'm just hopeful that one is not going to have a problem with the battery, which is very low. But I will try and interchange between my gadgets to make it a point that one doesn't go out. So today I'm very excited, as I already mentioned, that we have this topic today, and this is a very important topic. I believe it's topical, it's top of mind. It's about what is happening all around us, and it's got to do with a lot of things that are happening in our world, and fueled mainly by what we see happening in the Gulf region, Middle East, where we see Israel, US, as well as Iran war. And this has obviously affected everyone globally, and it continues to have a negative effect, I would add, to each and every one of us around the globe. As they say that if the US sneezes, everyone catches the cold. I think we are in that type of a situation right now, where with the wars that are happening, it becomes more and more important for us to read the science, try and understand what exactly is happening in relation to economy. This platform obviously is about economy, it's about entrepreneurship, it's about enlightenment, it's about you and I really getting into the hangle of things when it comes to things economic and what is happening on the entrepreneurial front, and how do we access opportunities, and how do we really become part and parcel of what needs to happen in our world, so as to be able to be effective and to be real players. And as we say, to have the means of production as well, to be able to hold and drive the means of production. So welcome to each and every one of you that you've been able to join from wherever you are. I know we've got people, a lot of my friends from the US who are here, a lot of my friends from UAE, and some are still joining. We'll continue because this is a recorded session, and a lot of our friends who are from different parts of Africa, Zimbabwe, mainly from South Africa, Eswatini, and many other parts of the continent do really join. These are esteemed listeners and guests and people who really come in here to get to learn and make a contribution and really be part and parcel of what is happening as pertaining to the economic issues. So I've got guests. I don't want to waste much time rambling and talking about what this platform is about. You all know, but I've got my guests who I'm so happy that they've set time aside to be able to join us. Because I am using some limited electricity here, I will try and make sure that I read. I'll start with our main guest who's going to be speaking after our local discussants. I have spoken, especially Mr. Madela. I'm going to, Irshad, your bio, as you said, is very long, but I will try and really do a bit of a summation. It's very difficult to summarize the profile of somebody who is as esteemed as our guest today. Professor Irshad Ahmed is a founder and the president and the CEO of Auris Bioenergy Incorporated, Avalon Energy Group LLC, Integrated Biorefineries LLC, from Cambridge, Massachusetts, and is a co-founder and a director and president as well of the MIT Climate Business and Innovation in Massachusetts Institute of Technology, commonly known as MIT, Cambridge. Right? He's a board of industrial advisors. He sits there, IBBC 2025, the International Advisory Board Committee Conference on Bioenergy and Bioeconomy, Lisbon, Portugal. He's as well a director and chairman in a joint venture of Avalon Bioenergy Pty Ltd, Avalon Bioenergy Uruguay SA, Avalon Bioenergy Kenya Limited, as well as a member, an industrial board member or advisor at Ken, as a Ken ambassador at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York. Elected member and the Director General of RLFC Alliance European Commission, Brussels in Belgium. His resume is very long and powerful, and he asked me to just summarize it, and I would love to share with all of you so that you can see the caliber of the people who are here with us today. We're going to be gracing this platform, talking to us about this subject that we're treating today of biofuels in the context of what's happening across the world. And starting off, I would like again to, the one who's going to start actually is Mr. Zakhele Madela. He holds a Bachelor of Sciences degree, chemical engineering from Wits, with 27 years of experience, 8 years in oil and gas, 4 years in engineering, construction, and management in EPCM, and 15 years in power generation, engineering services, contracts, and business development. That is Mr. Madela, who is going to be once again our speaker. And I'd like to just quickly go to Mr. Njali. He's an energy professional and a member of the Energy Institute in the UK, and a registered interim chartered engineer with the Engineering Council in the UK still. His expertise spans the energy sector, including biofuels and energy fuel technologies. He has contributed to discussions around South Africa on biofuels regulatory framework and advocated for policies that support mandatory biofuel blending, particularly in sustainable aviation and marine fuel industries. Njali is also an advocate for public-private partnerships as a mechanism for infrastructure development, and recently authored an opinion piece titled Securing KwaZulu-Natal's Economic Future, a Practical Call for Productive Growth. This is these are my esteemed guests that are going to be addressing us today. And without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to get Mr. Madela to be the first, who just gives us an overview of where we are at in terms of the policy framework on biofuels in South Africa. And he will be followed, obviously, shortly thereafter by Professor Irshad from the MIT in the US, who's going to be our main guest speaker, talking us through the entirety of this biofuel and all of that. And lastly, and not least, will be Mr. Njali again, who will just give us a bit of a wrap up from his perspective, and we have a discussion. This session is meant to go from now until 1 hour, 15 minutes, as we're already 15 minutes into the hour. So Mr. Madela, over to you, Ndaba. Just take us through what you have for us on this topic.
Good evening, Nonkosi. Good evening, esteemed guest, and good evening to my co-presenters, Professor Irshad, Ahmed, and Njali. Thank you for letting me speak on this very important topic. Today, I'm going to limit my presentation to basically tell the audience here what is in place and what is not in place. Because it's important that when we talk in context that can we get these things done. My work is cut out because I did send to you last week 3 important documents that speaks to the biofuels in South Africa. Before I go to those documents, let me correct the narrative, or let me assist where I can, because we also get judged by how we let misrepresentation of facts sometimes prevail. Biofuels are not going to be a substitute of your conventional oil and gas fuels. They are very, very small, but they play a very, very big role. So they will complement your traditional oil and gas derived fuels, typically petrol, diesel, jet fuel, lubricants, and heavy hydrocarbons that you use for tarring the roads or heating applications called heavy fuel oil. So in the infusion of biofuels, it is well thought out what role the biofuels will play. So in context of what is happening with the crisis that we have in the Gulf, well, it would be better if we had the biofuel industry, thriving biofuel industry, but it would not be a substitute of perhaps not importing the crude oil that come from those nations. It would not. So in relation to the people that are going to present, I'm here to say to you, if you just want to summarize and think of what am I trying to convey to you, I'm here to say there are tools, there are levers, there's everything that is needed for the biofuel industry to take off. And there's been challenges, and there continues to be challenges. But we are a constitutional state, South Africa. We are a democratic state. We operate according to the rules. You don't just wake up in the morning and do as you please. There are frameworks, there are regulations that guide you, even if you are a business citizen or a corporate citizen. So the issue of biofuels, there is nothing that stops it from happening. I'm saying this quite boldly. There's nothing. If you look at the regulations and the laws of the land, there's nothing. Instead, what doesn't happen is the people who would be the beneficiaries of the biofuel industry itself not being able to come together and claim their space. Why am I saying that? In terms of the sequence of events, we have a biofuel strategy document that was developed in 2007. I did send it to you. This biofuel strategy document, it's a roadmap of how South Africa would go about biofuels, which will be added to your traditional oil and gas or crude oil derived fuels. It's got all the rules, it's got all the profiling of the land, it's got all the mentioning of who is to participate and what happens when those people participate. It talks about which land has been identified in South Africa that will be appropriate for biofuels. And it talks about what would be the intended impact of the biofuels, and it starts placing the numbers into that. It's a map out. However, what was critical about that document was it didn't have much accommodation for the well-established big corporations that are in the oil and gas industry or crude oil industry. It envisaged the inclusion of the previously marginalized people of South Africa, and it stated the land profile where these people are found, and it started giving names like homelands, and giving names like land that is underutilized. It's a well-crafted document. It's old, it's a 2007, but it tells you exactly how the biofuel is going to uplift communities, how it is going to generate employment, how it is going to empower as many people as possible. Wind up the clock, the second document that we have is a document of 2019, 13 December. It's titled South African Biofuels Regulatory Framework. That document, again, it starts emphasizing the rules and regulations that are going to govern the biofuels. In other words, it's mandatory. It talks about what will be mandatory for the big oil and gas companies in terms of blending the biofuels that come from those that produce biofuels. It talks about the minimum and the maximum. It talks about the impact that this would have. It sets the rules of the biofuels industry, assuming that the biofuel industry has taken advantage of this. And then the third document is a request for information that came out in 2021. That particular document that came up in 2021, as you will read, and if you haven't come across this document, you request them from Pukule to Kaba. It came out in 2021 anticipating that there has been people that have been active in the biofuels industry. Its nature itself, it called for portfolio of evidence of what have you done. It assumed that you have an office, you are operating, you are already in the biofuel space. You would have done the environmental impact assessment, you would have a water use license, you will have things in place. And it was calling for those people in order to submit their projects to the Department of Energy back then so that the department would then assist them to have a space to put their biofuels into the main fuel pool that come from the crude oil-based feedstock. That was the last document. And in closing, because I also want to give my colleagues an opportunity to speak. So in summary then, this document that I've spoken about, the only reason why the biofuel has not been happening, it's the number of challenges. One of the challenges, Professor Irshad is going to talk about it in terms of attempts to lower the cost of producing biofuels, because as we speak today, a liter of biofuel is a little bit more expensive than a liter of fuel that comes from your traditional crude oil. But there was a roadmap that gave the information of what needed to happen in order to redistribute those costs in such a way that the biofuel industry would thrive. This is what we will do going forward, because I do not believe that in this short session we can go through this. My parting shot, Nonkosu, would be that if the members are interested, we could assemble a biofuels team, because we now know that the world is putting us in a situation where we have to question ourselves to say, do we always have to rely on imports all the time? And the reason why I'm saying this, I don't want to muddy the conversation. The bigger story of the biofuels is if we tap into our own hydrocarbon-based resources, namely, if we were to continue with the coal to liquid plants, which is what Sasol has in Secunda and would have at the Waterberg. The inclusion of the biofuels would stimulate that, because there will be carbon credits that comes out of that. So in retrospect, the biofuels will be beneficiaries of a sum total of a country wanting to industrialize, of a country wanting to redirect the resources. As a typical example, you would have known that people are talking about repurposing Hewlett or Tongat Hewlett. This is a sugar making company, but because people are eating less and less sugar, and there's sugar tax and there's all this complexity that comes with it, it's becoming more clear that part of that feedstock has to be repurposed into the biofuels. And by so doing, you create a lot of opportunities and job along the value chain. And you're talking about the waste to fuels itself is part of the biofuels industry. Let me leave it there to say, guys, the tools are there, the regulatory framework are there, the laws are there. However, it is the industry itself that must come together. There was a bit of a contestation from the big companies wanting to get involved, but that's not that serious. What is lacking is the people who are envisaged to be the beneficiaries of the biofuels industry to thoroughly read these documents and start the conversation that places them into the production chain. With all the complexities and the good things that come with it, then the rest will fall into place. Let me leave it there, Nonkosi. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Madela, for that introduction and just enlightening us about South Africa in particular and where we are at and what needs to be done. I'm so excited that you've just laid the groundwork so clear and just left us with some, nuggets in terms of why are the biofuels not gaining much traction as should, as well as maybe giving a suggestion in terms of assembling a biofuels team. I think we'll take you up on that. It's a very, very important point you've just put forth to us. I'm now going to allow, because I know a lot of our members here, they've been asking questions. They're excited actually about this particular session. And I do know that here we've got people that work from government, and there are people who are in the even from Sasol. By the way, some people are here. I would not venture to highlight who is here from where, but I'm happy that they are all listening, which is very important for this particular session, so that we do not just end up talking. As we're starting a series that's going to look into this and make sure that we really part and parcel of this sector moving forward. On that note, I would like to give over to Prof. Irshad to take us through his presentation. Irshad, I think you are able to put up the presentation if you want. I'm going to hand over the rights to host to you or co-host with me so that you are in a position to do that. Can you please try it and let me hand over to you?
First of all, thank you, Mr. Kaba and Mr. Madela. Your comments were really taken in the right stride. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak with all of you today, this morning, my time in Boston. It's a very timely topic, and it is more serious situation the planet is under right now from energy crisis perspective than we have witnessed in the last 45 years. If you recall, 1983 was the last issue we had to deal with at a global scale for the energy interruption. So what I've done is, what I like to do is what we cannot measure, we cannot manage. So in other words, that's a standard phrase in our MBA classes. So what I like to do this morning, I know time is limited, so I will keep it as tight to the schedule that has been allocated for me. So I'll use some slides I put together. They are as current as midnight last night, which actually gives you a real, true, current snapshot of what is happening with the energy disruption, energy flow disruption due to the war that's going on in Middle East. And I'll highlight that because without understanding the seriousness of it, I don't think we can make much of a case for biofuels or any other alternative solutions we have. The sense of urgency just elevates and dies with every crisis that comes and goes away. And this will hopefully is also a crisis that will go away. But I think it is important to recognize that the impact of energy supply chain that pretty much drives everything from geopolitical conflicts to environmental and climate change, the disastrous weather that we are all experiencing around the planet, the economical and socioeconomic impact, which is the standard of living, because as you all know, the cost of living is driven by energy, what you pay for your groceries in your grocery store to what you pay for your gas to fill your car, to anything that requires movement of goods and services is dependent on the primary cost of energy. So I will let me get going on that, and then please do hold your questions, and I will work on this for about let me set this thing up for 25 minutes, and then we will have time following that that we need. Okay. So let's. All right. I hope you all can see the slide. So we are, as I kind of already briefed into the topic, it's the global fuel crisis and the biofuel solution. But how it all relates to this last 10 days, literally, of the what we are beginning to call it as 2026 Strait of Hormuz crisis. It's reshaping the global energy magnitude. So first of all, let's understand the Strait of Hormuz is very significant. That choke point can disrupt the global energy prices in a heartbeat, which it has demonstrated. We always worried about Panama Canal, Suez Canal, but nothing beats the Strait of Hormuz. And part of the reason is 20% of the global oil supply or energy supply flows through it. And what does that mean? I mean, it's 20%. You will see it's 20%. That's 20 million barrels a day. The globe planet consumes about 100 million barrels a day. So the 20% is not just a small number. By taking 20% supply chain out of the equation, you will create significant disparities in the economics of oil trade. There are countries, there are many, many of them, where we have active biofuels projects, and I'll go through them at the end of this presentation, that those countries are 100% dependent on foreign oil. They will literally shut down with that supply chain cut off to them or the price going up. Then there's a second category of countries, which includes India, for instance, as a big consumer of 100% kind of imported oil, that it heavily subsidizes. As I grew up in India, I moved to US 40 years ago, nothing has changed in that period of time. When I look back, we were fully dependent then, we are fully dependent now, but one thing also hasn't changed, which is the price at the pump. What you paid in 1980s with the inflation adjustment, what you're paying now. And how is that possible? And that's possible because half of Indian government's budget goes into subsidizing the cost of your petrol or diesel that you pay at the pump. That story is true practically in various degrees of accuracy across the planet. There are countries who have it, there are countries who don't have the oil reserves, and they pay. And if they were to let the shock waves, like the one we are experiencing right now, flow through with full impact of it to the local consumer, there will be rioting, which we have seen in France. The trucking industry has raised quite a bit of turmoil and protests with the rising price of diesel. That was even 4 or 5 years ago, and another one is coming soon. So having said that, this is not to be taken lightly, a 20% disruption to our oil supply. Okay. So what does this mean in terms of numbers? The oil shock. So if you look at the average price of where the crude oil was kind of averaging for the last 12 months, it was about $60 a barrel. If you look at just the March 7 to February 28 number, that is increased by 35%. So we are talking about increasing the. Are you guys able to see this streak on the screen? I don't know where that came from. Let me escape. This is strange. Okay, we'll continue with that. So what does this mean? This I'm going to fast track some of these slides because I think we have bigger things to talk about. But the impact is really magnified because if you look at just one country of Qatar that supplies all of the energy needs, about 25% of LNG comes from Qatar to Asia and Europe. 84% of the crude through this Strait of Hormuz is actually goes to countries like China, India, Japan, and South Korea. That just goes to tell you how serious this matter is. And as my previous slide said, there are 300 oil tankers right now basically waiting stranded. Practically everybody has canceled or shut down the transition. So the macroeconomic perspective, inflation policies, Brent is increased, and what we are seeing is that, and the projections from Goldman Sachs and other major energy traders on the planet is projecting that the oil will hit about $100 to $150 a barrel if this conflict is not going to be resolved soon, and which we don't anticipate it's going to resolve soon. So we have that challenge. And Bank of America being one, and you got, BlackRock. BlackRock is one of the largest funds on the planet, $14 trillion under their asset management. If you compare that 14 trillion to the entire GDP of the continent of Africa, the whole GDP of continent of Africa is $3 trillion. So they are heavyweights. And they've been projecting that there is no quick turnaround. I mean, even if there is a resolution tomorrow, the ripple effect through the system is so strong, it's not going to just go away with the snap of a finger. Bad things happen fast, but going back to normalization takes a lot of time. So the point I'm making here is that what BlackRock is saying is something very important point to understand. You're not seeing the blunt of what the current crisis is at the pump yet. It takes about 10 to 14 day buffer period before it hits full force all the way to the ground level. And we are bracing, I think this coming week is going to be a defining week. It's going to be a significant turmoil in oil and energy prices beginning Monday morning, when tomorrow morning the markets open. So be prepared for that. In terms of realignment, I think Mr. Madela had done a good job, and I'm very curious to read his papers or his reports that he's referenced, which I will, that there has been frameworks for dealing with such crises, both in short term and long term, but they have never been implemented, and we'll talk about that more in detail. But there are pretty much every major country in the world is working towards doing that. Now, how are we dealing with this current immediate crisis, right? So the immediate crisis is there's very little spare capacity. So we're saying, okay, we're going to take 20% out of the supply chain. We can just increase production elsewhere. Well, it's not just an issue of supply demand, it's an issue of logistics. And the logistics problem will stay. So we could have all the oil in the world in Venezuela. We can't get it on the snap of a finger to countries who heavily dependent on it in Asia or other parts of the world or Latin America, because the supply chains don't exist. And very large oil and gas companies even cannot wave their magic wand and throw the resources. And the other difficulty you run into in responding to these crises, or shock waves, if you will, is if you talk to Chevron, if you talk to BP, Exxon, Sasol, any other major oil and gas company that is involved in this business, and you say, oh, so you have excess capacity, just bring it online, spend a few $1 billion to establish alternate channel and routes to manage the supply chain, which is more robust for the planet. It's easier said than done, because in their boardrooms, the toughest decision is, do we fix this problem with billions of dollars of investment, and 2 months later, things will come back to normal and all that investment we made is a waste of money. So while there are solutions, they cannot be applied as common sense says, because there are serious constraints in order to do that. So if you look at the current supply, right, So you have what's happening. So the response and the strategic reserves is that OPEC plus countries increasing their capacity or ability to supply more oil. And that has not, they are planning to do that in April. That's not has taken place yet. They want to add 206,000 barrels per day from April. But that just keep that in mind, 206,000 barrels they're going to add to the supply chain. Whereas the spare capacity is about 4 to 5 billion, 4 to 5 million barrels per day. That even cannot bridge, even if we tap into all of the spare capacity. And so if you look at the supply loss in week one, that's just the last week we have lived through, is about 3 million barrels per day. And potential loss for next coming week from this Monday on, the week of March 9th, we are bracing for about 6 million barrels of potential loss per day. That's significant. That's pretty much on a daily basis about 6% on the 100 million barrels that plant consumes every day. So this gap cannot be structurally filled. I'm going to skip this slide, but very quickly, I mean, if you look at the major crises that have occurred in the energy supply chain, there are about 4 of them before us to learn, but they are kind of far apart, and hence the memory fades. We had the oil embargo of 1973. Then you had Iran revolution in 1979. That caused a lot of trouble. And then you had Gulf War in 1990. Then you have Ukraine war in 2022 that pushed the oil prices up, and it's kind of hovering and stabilized, but at a higher number. And now we have this. The difference for what's happening now is it's not just a vanilla flavor, it's supply chain disruption because of the production limitations, like 1973 oil embargo, where the production was deliberately cut to cut back on the supply. And that shot the prices up, and the people who depended, the countries that depended on it, got really caught in a crossfire. This time it's different because the choke point at the Hormuz Strait is only 34 kilometers wide. It's like it's a choke point, like a chicken neck. You could hold a hold on it and disrupt it for a long time with very little effort. This is not like U.S. announced just now, yesterday announcement, Friday's announcement, that the insurance companies are dropping insurance write-up for the ships to pass through all the crude oil ships have insurance coverages. So major Aon and Lloyd's of London and major insurance underwriters, they've decided that if your ship is going to go through the Strait of Hormuz, we are not going to provide insurance to you. And that basically says that you can take the risk, but we are not, there is no insurance. And imagine a $2, $3, $5 billion worth of product going through and getting blown up. It's just not an economic decision that any major oil company will make to go through such a risk, right? So there are 2 solutions. The US says that since we created it, and there is a lot of geopolitical backlash from the Middle East countries saying that your decisions in the US has put all of us into the crossfire on this. It's not our war. Nevertheless, we can point fingers at each other forever, but the reality of it is that the problem is created. Now we need to apply some solutions. So the immediate solution, then there is midterm and long-term solution. Long-term solution is biofuels, and we'll talk about it very, very quickly. The short-term solution is, okay, let's unchoke the choke point. There are only 2 ways to do it. Provide military escorts for each ship that's going through the channel, okay? Well, that's one. That doesn't come without cost associated with it, and somebody has to write that check. The second is insurance coverage. The oil companies are not going to move their tankers without the money. So in US announced on Friday that we are going to create a $20 billion insurance fund to provide insurance for ships passing through that thing. And it'll roll out this coming week. I don't know if it is going to be successful or not. We'll see. The effect of this, now I'm going to start bringing this to home, right? So, okay, let's take an example as of close of business on Friday, March 6th numbers on sustainable aviation, jet fuel. So as Madela pointed out that there is a premium for biofuels and that continues to float it, and we need to somehow bridge that gap. And I have a very good answer for that later part of this presentation. The correlation is uncanny. I mean, you look at the blue curve underneath, that's the jet fuel in California, and then you look at the sustainable aviation fuel that is being available to replace jet fuel, which is renewable fuel that goes into jet engines. The mirror image is uncanny. I mean, they are very much correlated one to the other. And so what you're seeing is that the last week that sharp upward trend on prices on jet fuel absolutely impacted the selling price of sustainable aviation fuel as well. Now, the silver lining to this, from biofuels perspective, and Avalon Energy Group, which is I am heading in addition to MIT relationship and responsibilities I have, is that we are very heavily involved in a number of sustainable aviation fuel biodiesel projects that are being built around the world on 4 continents. And I'll share a little bit of that in a minute. But I think the silver lining to this is because it makes biofuels more economically competitive. If you are able to sell those biofuels at a higher price, because rising tide rises all boats, same thing, that means we have better margins, and there is going to be more investment that's going to flow into it. There are going to be decisions made in the boardrooms, both in the large Fortune 500 companies, as well as at the entrepreneur level. A lot of this effort has been driven by entrepreneurial efforts. There are some very few, you can count them on the hands of your one finger, of the fingers of your one hand, are big companies that have majorly bet on the first and second generation wave of biofuels, but not much. So this is real time. And if we look at this chart next Friday, that's going to look, what I'm bracing for is going to look much worse than it is right now. I'll skip this slide. A lot of work going on at MIT, and I'm part of that. But we'll talk about that if there's time permitting otherwise. I mean, I'm open to responding to anybody's questions. So there are global mandates. So there is, from public policy perspective, the gap has been, there's no requirements. If there are no requirements, then why anybody bothers to do that? And as I pointed out, biofuels are necessary not just to deal with this geopolitical supply chain disruption, which is also needed for climate management. It also needs for the socioeconomic job creation and everything else that happens with burgeoning new industry. But the one I want to point out is what the Brazil has done. Brazil is going to 30% biodiesel blend in their diesel fuel, and they already have a roadmap to go to actually 20% by 2030, but I read a story yesterday that's saying it's going to accelerate that. Ethanol is going to 30%, biodiesel going to 20%, which is significant. Countries that have a lot of palm oil, they are pushing biofuels because they want to support their own agriculture sector, and that kind of makes sense to them. India has been stagnating, very, very much behind, no matter what their mandates are, very, very small gestures. They are pretty much managing it the way they have managed it for the last half century. Philippines, EU is increasing it very significantly their very aggressive goals to incorporate biofuels as a solution. So if you look at the technologies, there are pretty much available technologies. It's not like it's rocket science. The hydro treating technology that has been used for over a century in the oil and gas sector, the hydroprocessed esters of vegetable oils can produce the sustainable aviation fuel, which is the replacement for jet fuel. And ethanol has been produced, the large production of ethanol, both Brazil and United States. I mean, we have 10% ethanol in all our gas tanks for the last 20 years. We are taking it to 15% blend. All of it comes from corn. So that raises another question. You may say, well, wait a minute, we are trading one problem with another. We're trading oil disruptions with now dependent on agriculture crops, which are food commodities. So the challenge is that how do we kind of eliminate use of food commodities for energy production? So if you look at our own experience on biofuels, and before I dive into some of these projects we are working on, and these are public-private partnerships, these are projects that are created under not just the collaboration and strategic alliances and partnerships with the world's major engineering, procurement, construction companies, but also the governments. So we have active projects, about 8 of them right now. Each project costs about $480 million in capital investment. They are on 4 continents. We are everywhere except Australia and Europe. We are in Africa, Latin America, United States, or North America, and Asia. And we are accelerating, I think, our implementation of that. And we are driving it based on 2 major criteria sets. Of course, the climate impact of the climate friendship or the feasibility is pretty good with respect to when you compare to fossil fuels. So that's not the point I'm going to make. I'm going to make point based on just the economics. As Madela pointed out, that the economic bridge needs to be built. These biofuels need to be cheaper. And they also need to be driven by very agile companies, which are entrepreneurial kind of model, which is what we are. But we are not doing ground up projects, we are doing top down. We are basically saying that scale has to be there. Even at the largest scales with $500 million worth of investments, you are dropping the bucket when you compare it to the oil and gas industry, but you have to start somewhere. And we are very pleased that the amount of traction and support we are receiving both. There are 3 countries we are actively pursuing this in Africa. We have a project in Eswatini, quite advanced. We've been on it for almost a year and a half. And then we have projects in Kenya, and we are developing a project in South Africa because the demand is there, the disruption is there, the continuous rollout of power outages is there. And you have shocks like these where the governments in these countries have very limited resources to take the brunt of full cushion the force of all the blunt shock of the pricing that comes through and not pass it out to the consumers on the ground. And that makes it difficult. So the only solutions they resort to is in situations like this is there are going to be grounded flights. There are going to be some increase in prices at the pump. There is going to be disruption in supply. There will be lines formed outside of gas stations, which we have seen every single time a crisis like this happens, because you're going to drive from gas pump to gas pump to see if you have availability of any resources. So let me share with you very quickly succession. So we have a project outside of Chicago, Illinois, outside of city of Chicago. And that is pretty much is our flagship that we are building. It'll supply the fuel to the Chicago airport as well as major consumers. Our Eswatini project has a very significant, if you look at the investment and the net present value the company and the project will create, that's about 71.6% internal rate of return. That's pretty significant. We're working with Panama. That is very, very well-positioned country where we are kind of dealing with the disruption to Panama Canal in a sense, where we are going to build a biofuels project there, and we are going to accelerate the integration of biofuels for the ships to transition the canal. And those who are driving on our biofuels will have preference. There's usually 2 to 3 weeks wait time that happens for that crossing of the thing. We have a project in Uruguay working with the public-private partnership with the government there. In Latin America, similar project. We are also building a seaport there to handle the logistics because it's not just enough to have your fuel. Same thing will happen to biofuels. You may have biofuels production, but if you can't get it to customer, it's useless. Similar project in India. So there are significant opportunities in Africa and emerging economies. We believe that South Africa and other African nations, what it is blessed with lot of good climate, good soil, good ability to grow crops. And to answer the point that Madela made, which is the cost gap, and I'll give you the bottom line on that. We solve that problem of cost gap. Biofuels don't have to be more expensive than fossil fuels. And the way we have done it is we have vertically integrated our biofuels production to non-edible, fast-growing oilseed crops, or the crops that can grow, which are not fit for human consumption, but they grow very easily with very little inputs of water and fertilizers and external energy sources to actually cultivate those crops. So if you look at crops like Camelina sativa, you look at moringa, you look at several other non-edible kind of shrubs like shufa that grows on marginal land that's not diverting the land for the production of food commodities, and also what's called cover crops. So one of the things we have zeroed in on is the ability to use the land between the harvest seasons of food commodity crops. So once the harvest happens, the next cycle for the crop doesn't start for a good number of months. That time is good time, which is not suitable from weather perspective. But we have a seed bank of 85 different varieties of non-edible oilseed crops that can grow in any marginal land in any climate. So we can find a suitable crop that can grow between that gap and produce the oil for the energy production of biofuels production. So the key takeaway is that the 2026 Hormuz crisis is one of the most significant disruptions that we have seen in modern history. And it is just unfolding. The worst is not here yet. The oil prices went to 60 to 93 to 100 to 150 million, dollars per barrel. And that will definitely impact every single person living on this planet. The crisis exposes the very fundamental vulnerabilities of global fossil fuel dependence. So don't take me wrong. The world runs on oil and gas, and it will continue to run on oil and gas. There is no way around it. When we talk about biofuels, we're not talking about 100% replacement. The way I look at biofuels is our insurance policy for the energy supply. So if you create regional hubs for biofuels production and make them self-reliant. So very early in my career, I worked for a think tank in Washington, D.C. called Institute for Local Self-Reliance. And the whole thesis was the resources need to be managed and the economics of what happens in the business world in life needs to stay within that region, that community. So I make it a point that if I can buy something from a mom and pop shop I'd rather do than from a big black box chain. And part of the reason being is that we did an analysis. I'll give you a very quick example, and then I'll stop this so that we can engage into Q&A. Is if you ever buy a burger at McDonald's, anywhere on the planet, only about 13 cents on that $1 stays in the local community. 87 cents leave that local community to corporates and to supply chain and to other people. And that's, I quote that as an example. It's my favorite example because it just goes on to show the challenges that you face if you don't focus on supporting entrepreneurship. So in terms of what's the solution? I think we need significant public policy mandates or changes. And we are lucky that we wrote a legislation for the country of Panama to enact mandatory use of biofuels to cross Panama Canal. That is in the House and the Senate there in order to pass that as a law. So similarly, I think it's one thing to have all the countries pledge that they want to do more biofuels. It's another that there needs to be a stick. There are carrots everywhere. There are incentives and premiums available, but I think there's no stick. We need not only mandates, but then we need legislation that will force, I think, the consumers and the consuming societies to really integrate biofuels into their mix. So with that, I am going to stop, and I'm sure I didn't do justice to this entire topic, which is not only timely, but I really wanted to scare all of us and prepare us for the next coming week. But also wanted to kind of give you a dimension of how big this problem is and how this can affect all of us. So with that, thank you for listening, and I appreciate the time.
Well, thank you so much, Prof, and appreciate your insight. As you have said, you could not have covered everything all at once. Like I said, we're starting a series, which we really hope it's going to continue so that it further enlightens people. What I like about what you said is this is not going to be a silver bullet to all our problems, because the current geopolitical order in the world as we speak is of such a nature that we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And we are really in a limbo, so to speak, because as others are calling for the de-escalation of the war, and the war does not seem to be doing so. And sadly, as you have said, it's going to affect us. But I think we are better prepared than not, and which is the reason for this particular session, to ensure that everybody is at least aware in kick-starting this discussion and participating. Already there are questions which I'm sure many of our colleagues here on the line would like to ask. But before we do, for the next about 5-7 minutes, I'd like to give to Mr. Njali quickly, and then we have our panel discussion. In terms of Babu Njali, are we really making any progress and any traction? Because yours is on the policy more than anything else, advocacy in terms of supporting this mandatory biofuel blending. And we know we've got certain targets in different countries, as Irshad has mentioned, including our own in South Africa, which is quite interesting. So I'd like you to please take us on, and then we'll get on to our discussion.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and greetings to the colleagues on the call. Well, I'm trying to open this camera, but yeah, it seems like I've got a problem. But nevertheless, Chair, I think starting from what Zach Madela has just said in terms of the policy framework in South Africa, I think it's very important to highlight exactly what Zach has said in terms of we do have a policy instruments that has been developed in South Africa. 2007, we have the Biofuels Industrial Strategy. Immediately after that, the government released the mandatory blending regulations. You know, that's where now we have derived our own targets in terms of the biofuels in South Africa. So quick, Babu Klaba, we're talking about two important elements here when we talk biofuels within the context of South Africa. First of all, we talk about the bioethanol, and secondly, we talk about biodiesel.
what are the blending mandates saying in South Africa? Well, the Department of Energy, the then Department of Energy at the time, and then after that, Mineral Resources and Energy, they've said in terms of the blending mandates, let's have 2% of bioethanol blend into petrol. So that's a first strategic objective that we should meet as a country in relation to biofuel. So in a certain extent, it does create that demand that we need, and that demand assurance that we need in South Africa, and for the private sector to come into South Africa and invest in biofuel. And the second strategic objective, we said 5% of that, let's blend biodiesel 5% into diesel. So that's another, pathway that has been created through the blending regulations. But what is very important to highlight on top, Babu Klaba and the colleagues on the call, is that we have a feedstock protocol in South Africa. So not every feedstock that is available in South Africa can be used for biofuel. And I think Dr. Ahmed, mentioned that, the issue around food security and the restrictions. If you look at these policy instruments within the context of South Africa, you can easily see that, there are restrictions in terms of the maize and the wheat, to be used as feedstock for biofuel in the context of South Africa. But what is permitted, in South Africa is sugarcane that can be used. We know sugarcane is a first generation of biodiesel, of biofuel within the context of South Africa. I think what we need to understand, practically from the point of view, is that we need to scale the market for biofuels in South Africa. And I think if we play around numbers, in simple terms, we take that 2% of bioethanol. If we assume that South Africa consumes roughly about 20 billion liters of fuel per year, and if we separate and say 12 billion of that is petrol consumption, and 13 billion liters of that is roughly diesel, and we say 2% of bioethanol of petrol, because you can only blend bioethanol on petrol. So 2% of that is roughly 250, 260 million liters per year. And that is a demand for bioethanol in South Africa. Same thing applies to biodiesel that you can blend with diesel. Diesel is roughly 13 billion liters consumed annually. 5% of that is roughly 550 or so million liters. So combined, we have a target of about 950 million liters, both on bioethanol as well as on biodiesel. So that is a market value, or that is a demand that is available in South Africa within the biofuel sector. And I think what is very important that we need to do now, that over and above the Middle East or the Gulf situation that is happening there, we do have, the publicized, scenario that is also evolving here in South Africa in relation to sugarcane. And I think it's very important to also view that within the context of biofuels, because KZN in particular, Mpumalanga in particular, those are the two provinces that are currently growing sugarcane in South Africa. And we will require about 1.5 million tons of sugarcane per annum in order to create 300 million liters of bioethanol. So you can also plug in the numbers to say, if South Africa consumes 25 billion liters of fuel per year, and the demand for biofuels is roughly 950 million. So you could easily see that we are way below in terms of meeting the biofuels targets, within the context of South Africa. So there is an incredible opportunity that government has created, obviously, through those policies. And I think what is very important on our side is to ensure that we continue engaging with the private sector, because at the end of the day, we may need to set up 2 or 3 ethanol plants in KZN. We may need to set up 5 or 6 biodiesel plants, in Free State or Mpumalanga, in order to ensure that we are able then to meet the strategic objectives as outlined by the government in terms of the blending mandate of 2% and 5%. And I think Zach also touched base on a very important point around the second generation of biofuels, which is the waste to fuel, generally, the waste that is derived from municipalities. Well, in this country, we generate roughly about 16 to 17 million tons of waste that is being disposed in our landfills. And I think the biggest mistake we are doing is that we disposed even organics, even food waste. So that's like creating biorefineries in our landfills, and that becomes the biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions within the context of climate change. So I think there's incredible opportunities to bring in municipalities closer in terms of developing the waste to fuel pathways within the context of South Africa. And I think from the sustainable aviation fuel point of view, I think there is another demand that is actually fast evolving. The International Energy Agency has just said, as per Dr. Ahmed, that about 100 billion liters of sustainable aviation fuel, by 2050 will be required. And we do need to ensure that we have sustainability in terms of feedstock, because the biggest challenges that we are facing is that the cost of biofuels vis-a-vis the cost of your normal fossil ethanol and diesel. So we have the biofuel costs costing a little bit higher at this particular point in time. And hence, it's very important that we need to strengthen the carbon tax, in order to ensure that these two costs, we are able to bring them into parity. Otherwise, it will be very difficult to have off-takes agreements. I don't think there will be any customer that will be more than willing to pay more simply because that customer is buying bioethanol or biodiesel. So I think we need to ensure that government strengthen more carbon tax in relation to that. But we also need to ensure that we continue scaling on our strategic objectives. I mean, what Dr. Ahmed has said, we're still averaging 5% blending mandates. But if you go to Brazil, they are already talking 2 digits. We need to actually engage with government in terms of ensuring that those strategic targets are actually scaled in order to create an enabling environment for the private sector, going forward. So in closing, I think on my side, there's a room obviously for improvement, but there's a room obviously to engage quite more broadly, bringing government into one room, bringing the private sector into one room, bringing the cane growers into one room, because there seems to be a general agreement that sugar in particular has to be diversified in terms of revenue generation. It has to be diversified in terms of obviously, growing the ethanol, production plants and biodiesel plants across South Africa. So I think on our side, we are extremely happy about this engagement today's chairperson. And yeah, I'm happy, I'm willing to take any of your questions going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Njali, for your insights. Once again, you've touched on very, very significant points and talking about the policy issues of this particular sector. And importantly, I think, touching on what currently is a topical issue in South Africa. We know of the Tongati Hewlett issue. We understand there's some ways now of trying to resolve this issue. It would seem, though, that there's some progress of some sort, but I've been interacting with farmers on the ground, and they were seriously concerned with what is really going to be happening with them going forward if nothing changes in as far as these issues of their sugarcane is concerned. We know that the process is very fluid at the moment, but I think this presents itself as a very important intervention that should come from us as entrepreneurs and from people like us who are going to be convening this committee pretty soon and talking about these issues. I don't want to waste much time. I think we've got literally about 30 minutes to discuss. And Irshad, please, I know you've taken time off your family. I'd like that we start with you if there are questions, and so that anyone who wants to ask some question is able to get your thoughts. I see there are hands already, and I'm going to just take 3 questions at a time. And I've seen the others in Eswatini that they've got some ethanol and they don't know what to do with it. I will take Brajo Kwabe from the States, who's going to be posing his question, as well as I saw some hand and it just lowered quickly. Let me take you, Padua. And then there's Ingrid and there's Njabulo Ndlovu. Thank you.
Thanks, Nkosi. This is a question for Professor Ahmed. How important is it, as you're talking about this new move to for biofuels? And Mark Green has been at this thing for over 20 years and on the continent of Africa, and I'm glad that you're keeping that fight up. But the reason why I say sourcing the crude oil is that in years past, and I'll make this quick, in years past, South Africa sourced this oil from Iran, but then the United States wanted them to stop sourcing the oil from Iran, but they didn't understand that the refineries in South Africa would really have to go through a major renovation. So the question I have very quick is that how important is it to source a specific crude oil for your project long term? And could this be an opportunity for Africa first, so that the African crude, as the refineries are being designed with that crude in place? Example, Dangote. He has already have committed to an African first a project, and could be a great opportunity to source African crude long term. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very good question. What I like to do, given the time constraints we have, is that the supply chain disruptions is always geopolitical games are always going to be played. You are correct, sir, that you have to look at it from the lens of what's the region or local Africa first approach looks like. And if you carefully examine resource base, what Africa has, lots of it, is the ability to produce energy crops as opposed to drilling for more oil, which you can continue to do so. So I think the approach going forward should be diversified supply chain portfolios, which I'm not saying anything new. I think every boardroom of every oil company that's importing or every refinery that's operating is constantly dealing with that. And I think given that as a backdrop, that's kind of the baseline we don't have much control over. I mean, it is for instance, 2 weeks ago, we didn't think that we will be here dealing with this situation. 2 years ago, we didn't think that we're going to have Russia invade Ukraine and cause some disruption there. And so things like this will continue to happen. My objective and focus, I think the point I want to drive home is that not only you need to diversify your supply chains for crude oil and natural gas, you have to include in it very deliberately and very, very much with a full thought and resolve a component for biofuels. Because a continent like Africa can literally, given your consumption of oil and gas is not that much in the scheme of the planet. I mean, out of the 100 million barrels every day that the world consumes, the Africa share, I don't have the number top of my head, but it's going to be in single digits. So it can be very well addressed by start building capacity to start blending. I mean, even a 5% blend is 5% less oil that you need to use, but it also has overarching benefits on the climate and creating jobs. Otherwise, those jobs are exported to where the oil is coming from. So I think my short answer to your question is, you are right with respect to geopolitical games that are being played and the pawn ship, like people using countries as pawns, like you will buy this from there and you will buy, and that is never going to change. I think the next push you will start to see from US would be buy more Venezuelan oil, because we seem to feel we control it. So having said that, I think those are the baseline problems that are going to constantly be with us. But I think the only hope that I would like to present is that the biofuels are economical now. It is possible to produce them on par with respect to cost. We can guarantee that. I mean, we working with Salzar out of Switzerland, we're working with Desmet out of Belgium. Technologically, we are there. The investments need to make sense, and a lot of hesitation on investments in biofuels was driven by the higher cost and public policy driven mandates, where if that goes away, what happens to my project? I think what we are doing is at Avalon, we are neutralizing it. We are saying that biofuels are here to be produced economically and that can stand the test of no incentives from any government and no mandates. I mean, my objective is let's make biofuels such that as you drive, extra mile to go to the next gas station because they have gas at 2 cents cheaper, you should be able to do that with biofuels, because if biofuels are cheaper, we don't need any other incentives or drivers. We will be able to make a business case and investments necessary into that. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Irshad. Let me quickly move to Njabulo Ndlovu and Mpom Pake, and then there's Tolizulu. Let's start with Njabs.
Good afternoon, Mr. Kawa and the other colleagues who have joined the Mandla or Not program. I want to find out, because I remember things was 2007 or prior to 2013, that time. Here in Mpumalanga, there was a guy from Nkomazi who was producing petrol and diesel with used plastics like from the dustbin. So, but what I didn't understand is that the government never seemed to assist that young man in terms of investing in him to produce that diesel and petrol, even though it was not going to be a much large scale, maybe like 22 million barrel or whatever, but as long that we are going to produce that petrol and diesel, and also looking at the matter of the ethanol from the sugar cane, and if we was able to scale up in that manner or being assistant or being developed in that, and maybe like trying to build something like a refinery for that man to produce and create job opportunities from that. But which I didn't understand from our government. I don't know, maybe is a policy that was signed that maybe South Africa will not produce oil or whatsoever, because even till today, there are still young men who are able to produce diesel, even though it's not in that strong capacity that it should be used maybe in cars or maybe any other stuff. But it's the fact that if maybe they were assistant and being built into the capacity where it was able to supply maybe other things, I don't know. How can we sort of like the government intervene on that?
Yeah.
Okay,
So
maybe sorry, Irshad, before you come in, can I just quickly take those two other questions and then hand over to you and other panelists, because I think I know of the story of the guy in South Africa who tried that. I think that talks to the second generation of biofuel. But just before you answer, let's just quickly take the two questions, Pompage and then Tolizulu. Then we go to our panelists.
Okay. Thank you, Ndate Kaba. Thank you, Doctor, for the presentation, Ndate Madela and colleagues. My name is Mpom Pake. I am a mechanical engineer. I've been consulting with local government for the last 26 years. Mine is not so much of a question, but a contribution to say, on the demand side, Doctor mentioned the issue about the requirement for the reduction of the impact on the climate by all parties involved, whether it's SASOL, whether it's ESCOM, whether it's municipalities. Can I just point it out that there's this policy called just energy transition that we need to also factor into the potential offtakes of biofuels and biodiesel, in as much as municipalities procure fuels and the usage of fuels. So I just want us to make sure that in our understanding and discussions as we move forward, we also factor that in. That's my first point. And my second point is that from a production point of view, where we source, I know a lot of this is spoken from the KZN sugarcane fields, but there's other provinces that are as much as possible to also contribute to the sourcing. That then we must look at the point of industrialization One of my companies is very big into the National Skills Fund. So can we understand that there's a market for biofuels and biodiesel, and then there's also funding to develop the skills that then can elevate us to a point where then we can compete with the best in the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Let's take the last one and then go to our panelist, Twali Zulu.
Thank you so much, Mr. Klaba, for recognizing me, and greetings to our colleagues and also the distinguished guest that have just shared so insightful information. Mine, Mr. Klaba, maybe it would be more about the issues that I'm currently facing. My name is Toli Zulu, Toli Ntlantla Zulu. I'm in KZN. I'm actually the director of the company called Mbele Petroleum, of which it is a wholesaler company. We are distributing around KZN and also some part of Mpumalanga. So the challenges that we're actually facing within the industry now, I think I'm not sure how the government is actually addressing this issue of the blending of fuels, especially the blending of diesel with eliminating paraffin. It becoming a very, very dangerous thing that is actually happening, of which government, I'm not sure if it is being overlooked or maybe there's something more that we need to do, because actually it is a trend. I've lost quite a number of clients of late due to those instances where you find the guys or the people that are actually blending the diesel mostly with paraffin. So as a result, you find that it is becoming difficult even to compete. And some of them, they are blending and disguising as, those biofuels. So that is how they're actually winning even within the industry. So I just want to check if there's anything that government maybe is actually currently doing to address the issue, because it's becoming a pandemic. And if we don't address it now, sooner or later, we'll actually regret. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Makeba. Let me go back to Dr. Irshad. And thanks, by the way, Dr. Irshad, for presenting your contact details. I hope people take care of those and really ask what is relevant with you and engage accordingly. I'll go to all my panelists, starting with Dr. Irshad and then to Madela and Janja. You can pick up whichever question you think you need to answer out of the three.
So first of all those were very good questions, and I'm looking at the clock, and I'm sensitive to everybody's time because it's the end of the day where you guys are. So a couple things, the points that were made before. So sugarcane ethanol industry is pretty alive and producing a lot of biofuels, both in South Africa and other parts of the world. So one thing that has to happen there, in my opinion, is the movement towards use of sugarcane bagasse, which is the biomass left after the juice is removed for ethanol production or sugar production. The next generation technologies are here now. The transesterification systems are here for biodiesel, as well as lignocellulosic conversion technology platforms are here for converting the additional biomass from the sugarcane, which is usually burnt up. So that will have a big impact on both the economics and the growth of that industry. In terms of the example about pyrolysis technology, which is using old recycled plastic and converting pyrolytic oil, which can substitute number 6 or number 4 diesel fuel oil. That technology has been around. One of the major issues with that has been over the decades is that it's very initial energy intensive. You need very, very high temperatures for that technology to work. And as I pointed out, the silver lining to the oil crisis always is that the price of energy is high. And when the price of energy in general goes high, you have more margins to then bring biofuels into the market, because you have more profitability available to you, as I've shown that energy cost of fossil fuels and biofuels are correlated. With respect to, I think, the other points that are made here in terms of public policy, as I pointed out in my presentation, that nothing is less important than the governments setting aside their internal politics and actually pushing a serious mandate towards adoption of biofuels into the energy mix. I study pretty much every country on the planet, their energy supply chains, and how they're managing it. And I am speechless to share with you that there are countries that are 100% dependent on foreign oil, and they are the ones who face the blunt of the disruptions, like the one we are facing now. And yet, public policy wise, there is very little to no motivation to push the biofuels in the front. That has to be changed, and I think that can be changed through influence from everybody who is on this call, to be heard, to make a point that biofuels are not a threat. Biofuels are not going to replace 150-year-old oil and gas industry. That perception needs to be changed and educated. Biofuels, as I best say, that like in the electricity supply business, there are peaks that happen in the demand, and there are some companies that build peaking plants, as they're called, to just supply or come online for that short period of time where the demand is high, or give incentives to cut back the demand during those peak hours. So the peak hours in electricity, I kind of compare that to the oil disruption crisis like the one we are facing right now. So what do? I mean, do we have excess capacity just sitting there to come online? That's one way to do it. Other way to do it is that cut off some of those peak disruptions by having biofuels in the supply mix and built into it. Brazil is the best example I can give you, where while they have some domestic production, a lot of their oil and gas is imported, but they have leveraged their agriculture sector quite effectively to replace 10, 20, 30% of the fuel consumption with biofuels into their blended mix. And I think that's a model, which is a very good model to emulate. So my closing thoughts are, I think biofuels, there's an education component. Biofuels need to be looked at as an economically viable, environmentally friendly alternative, not even alternative, but a supplement to our dependence on the oil and gas supply chain. That's pretty much how this needs to be driven. We need to coexist as a biofuels industry with oil and gas sector. And I think companies like Shell have bought 20 ethanol plants in the United States that they are producers of ethanol. You have other major oil refiners who own biodiesel production here. Valero is an example in the US. So the point though is that oil and gas companies are looking at the merits and the value that biofuels brings to the equation. There is limited adaptation, but I think it can be accelerated by public policy mandating certain blend levels and very aggressively increasing those. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. And Mr. Madela.
Thank you, Prof. Irshad, and thank you, Nonkosi. I'm not going to show my face now. First of all, on the question of just energy transition, biofuels they are part of that. It's just that it's not happening. Currently, one of the big things that have been happening in South Africa is the grant funding that goes with renewable energy projects. A lot of that you would have picked up that it speaks to biofuels and waste to energy. So the answer is yes, the biofuels are a bigger part and a bigger story of the just energy transition. In terms of municipalities need to take advantage of the biofuels and the waste to energy. There's a gentleman who spoke about other provinces. This is by no means a KZN. Virtually all 9 provinces in South Africa they qualify for biofuels / waste to energy. In fact, all 8 of them, they have different feedstock of biofuels. That's Western Cape, Northern Cape, Eastern Cape, Northwest, Limpopo, Mpumalanga, KwaZulu-Natal, with only Gauteng as an exception that will have to come through the waste to energy because there's not a lot of land to grow stuff there. But it's got a massive waste that can be turned into fuels, which is part of the biofuel slash biomass energy. And lastly, about the gentleman that produced fuel from plastic, I think the problem is there was an expectation that the government needed to take care of this young man. No, the young man needed to be linked to the people who understand the industry to link him up with the likes of Sasol, Shell, and all these other companies that could have easily given him a space to take this. And in fact, he qualifies to get the funding from the Waste Institute under the Department of Forests, Fisheries, and Environmental Affairs. But we can talk the whole day. All we are saying is South Africa's 9 provinces qualify for biofuels. Some are coming strong with a different type of feedstock. In Limpopo, you're talking moringa. You're talking a different feedstock in the upper part of Eastern Cape, in places like I forgot the place where they grow sugar beans. So there's a different side. There's no side, including Swaziland, by the way. There's no side of the country that will not benefit from the biofuel slash biomass. And therefore, the summary from me, guys, I would recommend that Nonkosi, we form an association. We have to craft the name of that association not to be only biofuels, but it must also encompass the waste to energy. And the reason why I say this, there has been a lot of successes when you have an association that speaks for the industry because it's able to feed back to its members. And that goes with Mr. Toli Zulu, who spoke about him and wholesale. You can contact me on the site. We've had some very good successes with regards to that by forming an association of the one collective voice. So we will do the same for biofuel slash waste to energy, and then we'll be able to feed the information back to the people. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Madela, even though you got a little bit cut there. Mr. Njanujan?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chairperson. And just to also confirm, with what Mr. Madela is saying, that literally each and every province will have biofuels, feedstock available one way or another. But we also need to look at the biofuel regulation framework, which then regulates the biofuels industry. I've mentioned in my earlier remarks that there are feedstocks that are actually not permitted or prohibited, within the context of South Africa. But there are others such as sugarcane that are permitted, obviously, to be utilized as a feedstock. But I think the issue at hand is around, getting all the stakeholders to be involved, especially municipalities. Because when you start talking about the issue of waste in particular, and that is classified as a constitutional obligation for local government, and in most cases, you find that municipalities are reluctant, to sign these long-term agreements, for waste delivery to the site. And another biggest issue that we need to be dealing with is the issue of waste characterization. Or the so-called source separation, because it becomes difficult, to deal with, the separation of waste. There are plastics, there are food waste, there are glasses, there are cans, there are everything. So essentially, that municipal waste stream is a heterogeneous mixture. And as a result of that, it becomes difficult to separate. But I think we should be focusing more on how do we convert the organics, into fuels, because that's what makes an economic sense at this particular point in time. And we should be focusing more around how do we then scale that to the transport sector, because the very same municipalities that owns the waste are the very same municipalities that needs to decarbonize, in their transport fleet. So somebody asked the question, about where is the market for biofuel. And I can tell you that, if you have a municipality that has already committed, to respond to the climate change. Well, we know in the country, the so-called national determined contribution, or the Paris Agreement, that the country is already obligated by that. We need to ensure that, we are able then to support municipalities in terms of decarbonization of their transport fleet. And that's where biodiesel will have to be utilized. I hear that there could be EV coming in and the like, but I still strongly believe that the biodiesel is an easy fuel that can be utilized to transform, the transport sector, especially the municipal fleet, in South Africa. So we just need to sit down with municipalities, because at this particular point in time, it seems as if there is no thinking about, the decarbonization of the transport fleet. So all what we often talk about is how do we then decarbonize the electricity supply in South Africa. So I can tell you that there is a market for biofuels. So all what is required right now is an offtake, for those biofuels going into the future. So, and there was a question with just energy transition investment plan. And I think, that plan literally, accommodate, biofuels in one way or another. For the fact that they talk about green hydrogen, and for the fact that they talk about sustainable aviation fuel, and all of that, it could be clustered under the umbrella, of the biofuel. So there is some sort of evolving market, in South Africa, although we are not there as yet. But I think we just have to encourage the private sector, to start crafting those innovative proposals, since that we have now an instrument that seeks to encourage unsolicited bid proposals from the private sector, where the innovation is no longer coming from government, but the innovation is coming outside government. So we just need to encourage the private sector to start crafting those innovative proposals and get in touch with the provincial government and national government in terms of how do we take those unsolicited proposals to the final investment decision. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hlongolo. Truly appreciate your contribution. Colleagues, we've gone a minute or two over our time. I want to, first of all, appreciate all of you for having come today and listened and engaged to this very important topic. And importantly, I want to thank my guests, Professor Irshad. Thank you really for taking your time from your family. And I know you had some family engagements, but you agreed that you're going to have to spare us a moment and share with us this very important topic. I know this is very close to your heart, and as we're working together, I'm glad you touched on Eswatini, which is the country that we are working in. And they are here, Emaswati, the people from Eswatini. We had invited them. They've been listening, and I'll give you feedback as to what's going to be happening next going forward. But importantly, thank you to you, Mr. Madela. You are the leader of this group in Amandla Mnoto. So I'm taking you up on the assembling of the biofuels team. Whatever name that we are putting together, I will talk to you after this session, just so that we can really do what we are known for on this platform, that we don't only talk, but we do three things. Is number one, implementation. Number two, implementation. Number three, implementation. And Mr. Njalinjali, it's been a pleasure to have you as well. I think your vast knowledge in terms of policy framework and discussions, the PPP and all other stuff that you are doing in this particular field will help us a great deal in being able to drive this thing together. What I like the most about this is the fact that it presents a huge opportunity for all, especially rural farmers and rural people, to be able to participate in the entirety of the value chain, whether they are planting sugarcane or they are doing moringa, whatever the feedstock that we are talking about. And it all is going to be determined by how we really organize ourselves to make sure that we participate meaningfully and fully on this opportunity. Announcements briefly. Rural Chamber of Commerce and Industry will share with all of you the link, register as members, be part of this. Number two, next week, I know some of my colleagues from Dubai, they were here. We didn't get enough chance just to give you a teaser, but definitely next week we're going to have a full blast session on AI. One of the other biggest disruptors, which is very important for us to really put a handle on and really get to understand where the world is going. Because truly speaking, there's humongous changes that are sweeping right across the world. And we need to be, number one, understanding what are those and be part of the change that this world is bringing about. And colleagues, thank you. I don't want to waste any more of your time. Irshad, truly appreciate you, sir. And Madela and Jalinjali, may you all have a very good evening. This is a series. We are going to come back again to look more deeper. I think by that time, we would have already assembled the biofuels plant. Good evening, good morning, wherever you may be.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you.